Welcome to Starborn Saga. Get ready to witness humanity's greatest secrets unfold. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. Necessity is often called the mother of invention, but fear is the twisted, deranged uncle who shows up at family gatherings with plans for world-ending machines. The Galactic Concord had always prided itself on being far beyond such primitive emotions. Their civilization stretched across 17 spiral arms, included over 4,000 sentient species, and had solved challenges that would baffle most others. From faster-than-light travel to creating the perfect interspecies cocktail snacks, by any reasonable standard, they were the pinnacle of cosmic achievement except when it came to weapons, or how that fact grated on them. The Concord had flourished for millennia, governed by species that had mastered quantum manipulation long before humans even discovered agriculture. Their advanced technologies were as common as stardust, and yet, despite all their achievements, they found themselves staring down an enemy they simply couldn't outthink or outrun. Across the expanse of the galaxy, countless civilizations had risen and fallen, each mastering their own corner of the universe. The Vexillians, with their crystalline neural networks, processed information at such staggering speeds that even the most advanced supercomputers would tremble in comparison. The Aldorans, with their energy-absorbing skin, had eliminated external power sources 8,000 years ago. Even the morph collectives of Cygnus, Beta, sentient gas clouds, had devised transportation systems capable of moving stars as casually as humans rearranged furniture. Yet, despite their immense progress, these ancient species were now helpless against a new threat, the Voracious Hegemony. The very thought sent ripples of panic through the assembly. The hive mind of semi-organic machines, the Voracious, consumed everything in their path, annihilating entire civilizations with terrifying efficiency. They would appear from the void between galaxies, destroy anything in their way, and then vanish before anyone could retaliate. And now, they had breached the Perseus defense perimeter. In a desperate attempt to find a solution, the Galactic Concord called yet another emergency meeting. The ambassador from Proxima Centauri sighed, his translucent appendages rippling with irritation as he settled into his seat. This is the third emergency meeting this cycle. I was in the middle of a 7-dimensional opera. Would that be the one where everyone dies in the end? He muttered. Are they all like that? Asked the Jovian representative, her compound eyes blinking in unison. Pretty much. A crystalline voice responded from the back of the room. The grand hall of the Galactic Concord gleamed with advanced technology, holographic displays floating between delegates, quantum translators humming quietly, and gravity adjusters ensuring that species from various planets felt comfortable, regardless of their size or mass. This was the height of galactic cooperation, a gathering of the universe's greatest minds about to be outshined by a group of primates. I call this emergency session to order, announced the chair being a vaguely insect-like creature, whose species had evolved beyond the need for names. As you all know, the Voracious Hegemony has breached the Perseus armed defense perimeter. A collective murmur rippled through the room. The Voracious, a nightmarish collective of semi-organic machines, had been the galaxy's greatest fear for centuries. They would emerge from the dark void between galaxies every few hundred years, destroy everything in their path, and retreat before any species could mount a meaningful defense. And now they were tearing through the defenses the Concord had so carefully constructed. The Unified Defense Council has exhausted all conventional options, the chair being continued. Our standard weapon systems are being assimilated faster than we can deploy them. A holographic display appeared, showing footage of sleek, advanced defense platforms being overwhelmed by the voracious swarm. Their elegant designs quickly repurposed into chaotic, twisted versions of themselves. How long until they reach populated systems? Asked a delegate from Arcturus. 72 standard cycles, replied the chair being, unless we find a solution. The Vexillian ambassador's crystalline form pulsed with deep concern. We've tried every weapon in our arsenal: quantum disruptors, reality anchors, causality inverses, nothing works. What about those new arrivals? Croaked a delegate from a water world. The ones who just figured out faster than light travel. What, 15 minutes ago? A profound silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the quiet hum of environmental systems adjusting to accommodate the delegates' biological needs. You can't possibly mean, began the Aldorian representative, disbelief clear in their voice. The humans, finished the chair being. A cacophony of voices erupted in the room. joined by nonverbal communications from species that didn't even use sound. Preposterous. They're still fighting over imaginary lines on their planet. They're poisoning their own atmosphere. Half of them still worship supernatural deities. The chair being raised all 8 of its upper appendages, signaling for silence. Nevertheless, there is something unique about their approach to weaponry. Another hologram appeared, showing Earth a fragile blue marble suspended in the vast emptiness of space. Earth home to a species that went from throwing rocks to splitting atoms in the blink of an evolutionary eye. The chief science officer, a being composed primarily of ionized gas contained within a suit, spoke up. In just 3 centuries of spacefaring, humans have developed more weapon variations than all of us combined. The display began cycling through images of human history: spears, bows, catapults, gunpowder, cannons, rifles, machine guns, tanks, bombs, lasers, railguns, orbital platforms, and countless other devices that defied easy categorization. While we perfected a few sophisticated weapons over millennia, the science officer continued, the humans created thousands of increasingly destructive devices in just a few generations. Their military history is disturbingly creative. The Jovian representative clicked their mandibles in disapproval. So they're good at killing each other. How does that help us against the voracious? Because, said the chair being, the voracious adapt to patterns. Our weapons are logical extrapolations of established science. Human weapons, however, defy logic. They're unpredictable, sometimes counterintuitive, occasionally ridiculous and, therefore potentially harder for the voracious to counter. Vexillian ambassador flashed with skepticism. You expect us to put our fate in the hands of a species that invented overkill? I expect us to use every resource at our disposal, replied the chair being, concluding allies with unconventional perspectives. Just then, the chamber doors slid open and the human diplomatic contingent entered. The aliens stared at them with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed disdain. By galactic standards, humans were unimpressive specimens, fragile bodies, limited sensory capacity, and brains that could only process a fraction of the information other species could handle. They wore environmental suits that looked laughably primitive compared to the technology around them. The lead human, a person of medium height with dark hair, stepped forward. You requested weapons consultants, they said, their voice remarkably steady as they addressed the most powerful assembly in the galaxy. We did, confirmed the chair being. Your species has a reputation, the human remarked, a slight amusement tugging at their expression. Yes, we've noticed how the other delegations look at us during trade talks like we might suddenly declare war on the buffet table. You developed nuclear weapons before you developed vaccines for common diseases, noted the Eldorian representative dryly. Fair point, acknowledged the human. But in our defense, actually no, I don't have a defense for that. It's pretty concerning when you put it that way. The chair being made a dismissive wave with its appendages. Nevertheless, the voracious threat requires unconventional solutions. Your military advisors will be granted temporary access to our technology database. We need weapons the voracious cannot predict or assimilate. The human raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. You, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, are asking us, a species that still hasn't figured out sustainable political systems, to design weapons to save everyone. That is correct, the chair being confirmed. Because we're good at blowing things up. The human suppressed a smile. Just wanted to be clear. We'll need full access to your manufacturing capabilities and material sciences division. The Vexillian ambassador vibrated with alarm. Absolutely not. That would be like giving a primitive species access to the only technology that might save your crystalline behind. The human interrupted. Look, we can stand here arguing about how primitive we are, or we can get to work on weapons that might actually stop the voracious. Your choice. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Very well, the chair being finally conceded. Full access granted. But know that you will be monitored at all times. The human shrugged. Fair enough. Just don't be alarmed by our methods. They might seem unorthodox. As the human delegation was escorted from the chamber, the Proxima Centauri ambassador leaned toward the Eldorian representative. Did we just hand over the keys to our most advanced technology to creatures who invented the concept of using a bigger rock to hit someone? Yes, replied the Eldorian. But remember, they also invented something called duct tape, that they claim can fix anything in the universe. And that's supposed to be reassuring. The Eldorian sighed. No, the Proximus ambassador said gravely. That's what makes it terrifying. The Concord's research facility orbiting Teoweti was the size of a small moon, though calling it a facility was like calling a supernova a warm day. Inside its immense halls, the collective knowledge of 4,000 species was analyzed and pushed to the limits of possibility. Now, it was being turned upside down by creatures who still found fart jokes amusing. What exactly are they doing? Asked the Eldorian supervisor, watching through an observation portal as the human team unpacked crates of equipment that had arrived via their own transport ships. I believe they call it brainstorming, replied the Vexilian analyst, their crystalline form flashing with doubt, though it appears more like thought drizzling at best. Inside the laboratory, the human team had commandeered several holographic displays. They were simultaneously projecting data about the Voracious Concord weapon systems and strangely ancient Earth entertainment media. Are they watching cartoons? The Eldorian's voice modulator couldn't quite capture their disbelief. Apparently they call it inspiration, the Vexilian responded. I've been monitoring their communications, the analyst added. Half their weapon ideas come from fictional entertainment. That can't possibly be true, the Eldorian responded. Humans wouldn't, and just like that, the improbable began to unfold. Saying truth is stranger than fiction. In their case, the line between the two seems remarkably permeable. Inside the lab, the humans had formed small groups, each tackling the problem from different angles. Unlike the methodical, hierarchical approach of concordant teams, the human process appeared chaotic, almost random. They argued, laughed, sketched improbable designs on whatever surfaces were available, and occasionally threw objects at each other in what the aliens eventually realized was not aggression but some form of ideation ritual. Their approach lacks all scientific rigor, observed a morph collective representative who had joined the team, their gaseous forms swirling with agitation inside their containment field. Perhaps, acknowledged the Eldorian, but they've made more progress in 12 hours than our teams did in 12 cycles. On the main display, one of the humans was gesturing at a simulation of the voracious swarm behavior. Look, these things adapt topology. Signatures, right. They analyze the pattern, then develop countermeasure a score act, replied the unconcordant AI assistant assigned to the humans. Their adaptation rate for standardized weapons is approximately 3.7 seconds. So what? IFE don't use a standard pattern. The human grinned. What if the weapon itself evolves? The weapon evolution is a common design principle. The AI responded. The Concordat has developed self-modifying densive systems for no. Interrupted another human. Not like that. You guys think linearly. Predictably your weapons evolve along established pathways. What if we created weapons that evolve randomly, chaotically? The AI's responsity stretched to several seconds and eternity. For a system that normally processed information at near light speeds, such a weapon would be unpredictable. Exactly. The human clapped their hands together. Unpredictable to us, unpredictable to the voracious. It would also be extremely dangerous, noted. The control parameters would be difficult to establish. The humans exchanged glanced at. The observing aliens couldn't interpret. Control is overrated. Sedone human quietly. Well, that's terrifying, muttered the Eldorian supposer 3 days later. The Concordat High Command received the first prototype proposals. The presentation, designed to accommodate beings of all physical compositions, fell into a stunned silence as the human team displayed their concepts. You can't said the defense minister, a being composed of magnetic fields contained within a precision-engineered suit. These designs violate 17 differentifi protocols. Yeah, we figured they might. The lead human engineer shrugged. But they'll work. The first proposal is particularly concerning, continued the minister. A weapon that intentionally destabilizes its own containment field. Call it the Chaos Cascade, explained the human. It's based on the principle that a controlled failure can sometimes be more effective than sustained operation. You're proposing why intentionally create failing technology? The minister's magnetic field pulsed with what might have been hysterical laughter in a biological species. Think of it like an immune system, suggested another human. When your body fights an infection, it doesn't just use one approach, it throws everything at the problem, including random mutations and cells. Sometimes it's the mistakes that find the solution. The Vexilian science director's crystalline form vibrated slightly, their equivalent of a slow skeptical headshake. Your biological metaphors are not reassuring when applied to weapons systems. That could potentially destroy entire star systems. Look, said the lead human, leaning forward. You've all been fighting the voracious with perfect weapons, elegant weapons, beautiful weapons that are marvels of engineering and physics, and they've all failed spectacularly. A holographic display activated. showing footage of the most recent Voracious incursion. The alien hive machines swarmed over Concord defense platforms, assimilating their technology in seconds. The Voracious predict what your weapons will do because they're designed by the same logical principles you use for everything else. Continued. The human need weapons that don't make sense, weapons that are deliberately flawed, weapons that break the rules. Humans observe the representatively certainly excel at breaking rules. Damn right. We do, agreed the human with a grin. Now, can we move on to our second concept? We call it the Rube Goldberg. The holographic display shifted to show a weapon system of mind-boggling, with multiple interconnected components that seem to serve no clear purpose. This makes no sense whatsoever, said the Morph Collective Prastain, their gaseous form churning with confusion. That's exactly the point, replied the human. It's overcomplicated. The Voracious analyze weapon systems to identify the key components, then target those first. With this design they can't identify what's important because if everything both is and isn't crucial to operation. It's like trying to find Theplet in a reality television show, added another human. There isn't one, but your brain keeps insisting. There must be. The defense minister's suit emitted a sound like static discharge. Their species equivalent of a psi. These approaches are unorthodox. That's why you hired us, pointed out the lead human. You've treated orthodox, failed the chair being, who had been silent throughout the presentation. Finally spoke. You mentioned a third concept. Yes. The human team exchanged glances again. This one as well, even we think it's a bit extreme. The holograph explicitly changed once more, showing what appeared to be a standard missile design but with components that made no apparent sense. We call this one the Murphy said Thelid human, after an old Earth law that states anything that can go wrong will go wrong. You've designed a weapon to fail? Asked the Vexillian, unable to hide their confusion. No, replied the human, we've designed a weapon that looks like it's going to fail catastrophically, but actually works perfectly by failing in exactly the right way. Silence fell over the chamber again as the implication sank. In the Voracious analyze our weapons and adapt to them, explained the human. So we give them something that looks like it's about to undergo catastrophic failure. They'll adapt to what they think is about to happen, but what actually happens is something completely different. It's like a convincing someone you're going to punch them in the face, added another human, but then kicking them in the shins instead. A deception strategy, mused the chair being. Interesting. Deception is a core principle of human warfare, said the lead human. We've elevated it to an art-formed defense. Minister's magnetic field fluctuated rapidly, indicating rapid processing of new information. These proposals are unorthodox, but they may have merit. One need to test them, said the chair being. Controlled conditions. Isolated systems. Did lead human nodded. We've anticipated that we'll need a secure testing facility and materials for prototype construction. It will be arranged, confirmed the chairbing, but I must emphasize the need for caution. These concepts are volatile, of course, agreed the human, with what the aliens were learning to recognize as are not entirely sincere. Smile. Safety first. As the meeting adjourned, the Eldorian representative approached the chair being. Are we certain this is wise? They asked quietly, giving humans access to our advanced manufacturing technology, allowing them to build weapons based on principles of chaos and deception. The Kerbin's appendages made a gesture that approximated a shrug. The Voracious will reach inhabited systems in 65 cycles. What choice do we have? I understand the necessity, replied the Eldorian, but there's some inkling about how enthusiastic they are about creating weapons. Perhaps that enthusiasm is precisely what we need, suggested the chair being. For millennium, muttered the Eldorian. 2 weeks later, the first prototype tests began in Ammo star system that had been evacuated specifically for this purpose. The Concordat High Command observed from a safe distance. Their ships positioned well outside the test zone. The human had constructed scaled-down versions of their 3 primary designates would be deployed against a small sample of captured Voracious technology. A dangerous undertaking, but necessary to determine effectiveness. Test 1 commencing, announced the human team leader over the communication system deploying Chaos Cascade, remote star system that had been evacuated specifically for this purpose. The Concordat High Command observed from a safe distance. Their ships positioned well outside the test zone. The human team had constructed scaled-down versions of their 3 primary designates would be deployed against a small sample of captured Voracious technology, a dangerous undertaking but necessary to determine effectiveness. Test 1 commencing, announced the human team leader over the communications Chaos Cascade prototype. The observers watched as a sleek deceptivable device approached the containment field holding the Voracious sample for armament. Nothing seemed to happen. Then the device began to change components, shifted energy signatures, fluctuated wildly, and what appeared to be errors cascaded through its systems to the Concordat. Observers, it looked like a catastrophic malfunction. Is it supposed to do Thatist? The Vexillian science director nervously. Yes, replied the human watch. What happens next? The voracious sample extended tendrils toward the apparently filing device, beginning its standard assimilation process, but as it connected, something unexpected occurred. Instead of being absorbed and analyzed, the human weapon's chaotic fluctuations seemed to transfer to the voracious sample itself. Alien technology began to vibrate then, to distort, and finally to break apart into component molecules. What just happened? Demanded the defense minister. The chaos cascade worked exactly as intended, explained the human. It created a pattern of failures that the voracious attempted to assimilate, but the pattern itself was designed to corrupt their adaptive process. You weaponized failure, said the old Dorian, a note of reluctant admiration in their voice. Humans have a long history of turning our mistakes into advantages, replied the human with a smile. We're uniquely qualified to weaponize failure because we've had so much practice failing. The Concordat representatives exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time in centuries they had seen voracious technology destroyed, rather than merely contained. It was a significant breakthrough, but achieved through methods that defied their understanding of proper weapon design. Shall we proceed? To tester, asked their human. The Rube Goldberm is my personal favorite. The Cherbeans, appendagist, which slightly their species equivalent of nervous anticipation. Prost, they said, and as the second test began, even the most skeptical observed to admit perhaps there was something to be said for the chaotic human approach. After all, testing station ALPHA9 buzzed with more anxiety than a quantum uncertainty principle. 17 species of aliens watched in horror as the humans repeatedly dismantled, modified and reassembled their weapon prototypes with casual disregard for safety protocols. 14th revision. This week, muttered the old liaison, they call it iterative development, I call it mitigating hurt. Attacks in species that don't even have hearts. Below, humans crawled over their prototype like repair bots on a malfunctioning cruiser, shouting, laughing, and occasionally throwing tools to each other with alarming nonchalance. Why must they physically touch everything? Ascida gaseous morph. Collective observer, apparently their brains work better when their appendages are risking electrocution, replied the Eldorian. A fire being entered. Suddenly the voracious have accelerated their approach 48 cycles until they reach populated systems. The humans have requested immediate authorization for full-scale testing, they continued. I've granted it. The room erupted in overlapping protests. These weapons need safety protocols, proper protocols. Won't matter if we're all consumed, interrupted the chair, being the time for caution has passed. 4 hours later, a substantial voracious sample sat secure in a containment field as the human weapon, unrecognizable from its original design, waited on a deployment. Initiating deployment, announced the lead human engineer. The weapon approached the containment field, initially mimicking stand protocols. The voracious sample extended tendrils toward its surface, rippling with mechanical anticipation. Initiating catastrophic failure assimilation. Suddenly the weapon began to spark and shudder. Warning indicators flashed as it appeared to malfunction. Spectacularly, the voracious tendril shifted, a reaction never before observed. Its confused whispered them of collective observer deploying the quantum fizz. What happened next defied description. The weapon existed in multiple quantum states, simultaneously, its energy signature fluctuating wildly. When the voracious tendrils touched it, they began to dissolve, not physically but fundamentally. Their quantum coherency reviled, spreading throughout the entire sample. Within seconds, the alien technology was reduced to disorganized molecules. Complete molecular dintrion, confirmed the Eldorian. No functional components remain. Houdmunded the Vexillian science director. That defies 17 different laws of quantum mechanics. 18 actually, corrected the human. We broke one more just for good measure. That's impossible, insisted the Vexillian. You've been approaching quantum mechanics as immutable laws, replied the human. We approached them as guidelines with flexible interpretations. Can this weapon be scaled up for deployment? Asked the care being. Absolutely, confirmed the human. Will need your advanced fabrication facilities and 20 tons of coffee, but it's doable. As the observers departed, the Eldorian remained with the chair. Biengutel, they asked quietly. I don't know, admitted the chair being. Myself, hoping a novel sensation after centuries of logical calculation. The humans seem to operate on hope rather than certainty, observed the Eldorian. Perhaps that's their greatest weapon of all. In the chamber below, the human team began skilling up their prototype fueled by success and alarming quantities of caffeine and the watching aliens, finally understood why humans made the galaxy's most advanced weapons not because they were smarter but because they refused to accept that something was because everyone else said it was the Strategic Command Center, a structure spanning an entire asteroid hosted the largest assembly in Concordat history species that had been enemies for millennia stood shoulder to whatever passed for shoulders. United by their mutual desire not to be consumed, the holographic display showed the voracious advance, a churning mass of semi-organic machines that had already devoured through inhabited systems. 24 cycles until they reached Proxima Colony announced. The Defense Minister status of the human weapon deployment vessels in position, replied the tactical officer. The humans call it Project Pandora. Another mythological references. Apparently it means releasing something unpredictable that cannot be. How reassuring, muttered the Vexillian. The human team made final adjustments to their deployment protocols, surrounded by bewildered Concordat engineers. Are your people ways this calm before potential annihilation? Asked the chair, being the commander glanced up. Oh, we're not calm, we just process existential Toroda friendly. Some make jokes, some focus on the task, some triple check everything. Evolution is funny that way. They continued. Fear either paralyzes you or makes you hype. Natural selection favored ancestors who could still function while terrified, and now the galaxy's fate rests on that adaptation. Ironic, isn't it? The human smiled grimly. The species you consider too primitive might be the only one capable of saving everyone. The tactical display flashed an alert. The Voracious had changed course, accelerating toward the deployment vessels. Perfect, said the human commander. They're taking the bait. This was planned, asked the chair, buying off course. We wanted them to detect our ships. Initiate Phase 1, ordered the human. The deployment vessels moved to intercept the Voracious fleet, which spread out to surround what they perceived as conventional Concordat defenders. Now for the fun part, said their human. Initiate Phase 2, catastrophic systems failure. Throughout the command center, warning indicators flashed as the deployment vessels appeared to suffer simultaneous critical malfunctions. Exactly what we planned, assured the human as the Voracious hesitated. Abby, never before observed. They don't recognize the failure pattern, asked Voracious. Made contact with the first vessel. The command center fell silent, but instead of assimilation, the enemy's tendrils began to fluctuate chaotically. The disturbance spread, their fleet disrupting their coordinated movements. Deploy the quantumphys. The deployment vessels reconfigured into formations that defied conventional engineering, where the leading edge of the Voracious fleet had been a rapidly expanding cloud of disassociated olus appeared. It worked, whispered the Vexillian science director. The effect spread through the Voracious fleet like a wave. Within hours, the existential threat to galactic civilization was reduced to dispersing atomic particles. 3 cycles later, the Concordat convened for a formal recognition ceremony for millennia. We prided ourselves on logical progression and elegant solutions, declared the chairbing. Today we acknowledge the limitations of that approach. Therefore Earth and its colonies are granted full unconcordant membership with special recognition of their unique contributions to defensive technologies. Additionally, we establish a joint weapons development initiative combining unconcordant resources with human creativity. Finally, we formally acknowledge what recent events have magically the most advanced weapons in the galaxy are made by humans, not because they possess superior technology but because they possess something. We had evolved beyond the ability to think rationally when rational approaches fail. As the ceremony concluded, Thildorian liaison found themselves in conversation with the Vexillian Science Director. Will we regret this decision? Asked the Vexillian, quietly bringing humans fully into the Concordat. Perhaps, acknowledged the Eldorian. They are unpredictable, occasionally violent, and still find amusement in the most primitive behaviors. Then why risk it? Valorian's energy-absorbing skin rippled thoughtfully, because sometimes the most logical approach is to be deliberately illogical across the reception. How humans had already begun teaching ancient civilizations about drinking games and karaoke. Their laughter echoed through the chamber, as dignified representatives of species that had mastered interstellar travel before humans had discovered fire now attempted to balance objects on their various appendages for amusement. And throughout the Concordat, the message became clear. Had nearly cost them everything while beautiful imperfection had saved them.